Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, we are from Group H, English for Administration, and today we will presentation about implication of private sector behavior on public finance sector. But before we discussing about the material, I will introduce my friend first. Okay, we have four presenter and me as moderator. And the first presenter is Intan Febriani. She will present about introduction, and the second presenter is Liana Utami Putri. She will present about literature review, and the third presenter is Lukman Nur Hakim. He will present about methodology and data, and the last presenter is Lutfia Apriandini. She will present about empirical result. And the last is from me. I will present about the conclusion. I think this is time for Intan Febriani to present the first material.
Starting with the early 2000 to the end of 2007, macro financial conditions were very favorable in a global perspective. Economic growth was robust and stable. Liquidity in capital and money market was abundant. Profitability in the financial sector was high, and asset prices were constantly rising. All of these were also accompanied by an important increase in the debt level in the private sector and public finance sector as well. Financial markets started melting in the summer of 2007 as a result of the intensification of deterioration in the US housing market. In the case of Europe, we were the witness of a double spillover effect. In the first step, spillover came from the US financial system to the European financial system. And in the second step, after roughly 2 years, the prolonged stress in the European financial system resulted in the deterioration of public finances. Similarly to every phenomenon in the science of economics, the sovereign debt crisis also have root causes, root driving factors which determine the path of retrospectively unhealthy public finances. The aim of this research is to study the effect of such a driving factor, namely the behavior of the private sector, and the result of the research can serve as a useful tool for policymakers in determining policy responses, addressing imbalances with respect to debt accumulation in the private and public finance sector. In the context of the preparation for adopting the euro, another important feature for the policymakers will be the setup of paths and guidelines with respect to harmonization of behavior patterns with the ones characteristic for the Eurozone countries. To be more precise, we are referring to characteristics which the Eurozone as a whole will commit to itself. Thank you.
Thank you for Intan, and the second material will be presented by Liana Utami Putri. Literature review. As a result of the ongoing debt crisis in Europe, Not only the Eurozone member states need to bring their public finances off a sustainable path, but the future member states need to show effort as well. Firstly, Afonso 2005 evaluate if and to what extent expenditure-based consolidations have been more successful than other consolidations in Central and Eastern European countries. Using logit models showed that since the consolidation have been more successful in Central and Eastern Europe comparative to the revenue-based consolidation. Secondly, Perez 2005 evaluated the effectiveness of a set of fiscal indicators as early warning signal tools. The main indicators used in an error correction model framework were the expenditures and revenues of the central government. Camba, Mendes, and Lamo 2004 provide estimates for quarterly balances in the case of Germany and Italy, having as explanatory variables and the annual general government deficit and the GDP. Then, Baldassi 2011 developed a fiscal stress index which provides an early warning tool to identify exposure with respect to fiscal sustainability risks and also help identify the underlying factor which drive change in fiscal stress risks. The result is 1. In advanced countries, the top predictors of fiscal stress are indicators of gross financing needs and fiscal solvency concern. 2. In emerging economies, the best predictors of fiscal stress are risks associated with public debt structure and liquidity constraints. Next, Furseri and Ribeiro 2008 studied the relationship between government spending volatility and the size of the economy. Based on a simple bivariate OLS model, they show that smaller countries will usually post a more volatile government spending. Finally, Nicol and Van Steenkiste 2008 used a dynamic panel threshold model to study the relationship between the current account balance and the fiscal balance. The results show that in countries with low and medium debt levels up to a debt level of 44% of GDP, the relationship is positive. An increase in the fiscal deficit leads to higher current account deficit. In countries with debt ratio between 44% and 90% of GDP, the relationship is still positive, but less significantly. In countries with very high debt ratio above 90% of GDP, the relationship is negative and insignificant, suggesting that a rise in the fiscal deficit does not result in a rise in the current account deficit. Thank you for Liana. And the third material will be presented by Lukman Nur Hakim.
The next chapter is methodology. The relationship between the government balance and the private sector behavior is studied with the help of the classical linear regression model. Is the example? Yes, where Y1 denotes the government balance of the studied economy in quarter T as an endogenous variable, N is the number of quarters, K1 is the number of explanatory variables, B1 is the coefficient estimate for variable I, represent the value of explanatory variable E in quarter T, while U1 is the error term in quarter T. In order to achieve a more robust estimation process, the effects of the different explanatory variables were tested both in a bivariate and a multivariate regression model. Since a time series analysis is conducted, a great emphasis has been placed on the assurance that the studied variables are stationary. For the testing the stationary property of variable, the augmented Dickey Fowler ADF test has been used. The next chapter is data. The data used for the analysis refer to the period comprised between 2000 Q1 until 2011 Q4, having as source the Eurostat database. The empirical research was conducted for 10 economies. That's Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. Government balance, often referred to as fiscal balance, stands for the balance of the central budget of countries. The variable is also computed as a percentage of gross domestic product, and it represents the net lending positive values or the net borrowing negative values. As figure no 1 points out, the maximum values are registered by Hungary 36.12% quarter 1 of 2009, distantly followed by Bulgaria 11.10% quarter 1 of 2007. Surprisingly, the minimum values for the government balance are registered by the very same countries. Hungary 18.18% quarter 1 of 2005 and Bulgaria 18.14% quarter 4 of 2007. The private sector balance percent gross domestic product was computed by subtracting the general government balance from the current account balance. The maximum values registered for the private sector balance percent gross domestic product were registered at the end of the crisis quarter 4 of 2010 in Latvia to 27.21% and in Lithuania 25.47%, while the minimum values for the private sector balance percent gross domestic product were registered in Bulgaria right before the beginning of the crisis, 40.83% quarter 1 of 26 and 38.87% quarter 2 of 2008. An interesting case in that of Romania, which registered the minimum values for the private sector balance in quarter 2 of 2002 of minus 38.55% and minus 28.98% in quarter 4 of 2003 as seen in figure note 2.
Thank you for Lukman. And the last material will be presented by Lutfia Apriandini.
Next is econometric analysis. Based on the explanation, form the table about the estimated coefficient and p-values for each analysis country. Bulgaria, 5 variables were found to have a significant impact upon the evolution of the government balance. Private sector indebtedness measured took the current account balance corrected with the government balance will immediately result in an anti-cyclic behavior of the government. So the global result will be that increasing private debt will increase the government deficit and subsequently the government debt as well. The financial account of the balance of payment also has a positive coefficient, determining the government to raise its expenditure over its revenues. The Czech government balance is mainly influenced by the financial account, the real GDP, and the household consumption. All three variables coefficient indicated that the Czech government has conducted an anti-cyclical fiscal policy. Estonia is another country which conducted a typical anti-cyclical fiscal policy. Similarly to Estonia, Latvia also conducted anti-cyclical fiscal policies, with far less success, however. The third Baltic state, Lithuania, also reduced its public debt in the context of sweetened private sector indebtedness. Lithuania's government responded both to the external consumption and the internal consumption of the private sector. Hungary is a perfect example for the implementation of a pro-cyclic fiscal policy. All three significant variables, private sector indebtedness, real GDP, and household consumption, have a negative impact on the government balance. Poland also followed an anti-cyclical fiscal policy. The government usually reduced its expenditure whenever private consumption started to grow. Slovakia and Slovenia countries, which are Eurozone members, implemented anti-cyclical policies.
Okay, everyone, this is the last point of our presentation, which is conclusion that will be presented by me. But before that, I will to introduce myself first. So my name is Gina Wasila and my student ID number is 11780100092. So, the conclusion of all our material today is the recent sovereign debt crisis in Europe affect not only the Eurozone member states but non EMU countries as well. Many of the Central and Eastern European countries will have to undertake more fiscal consolidation in the near future to reserve the trend of rising debt ration caused by the recent crisis and to comply with the European Union fiscal framework. Therefore, the question of how to design fiscal consolidation and how to preserve fiscal soundness is of the great interest. In our paper, we have investigated the relationship between private and public sector behavior and on a sample of 10 Central and Eastern European EU member countries. The analysis comprised the period between 2000 Q1 to 2011 Q4. Our findings show that there was a divergent behavior among the studied countries, some of them reacting pro-cyclic and others anti-cyclic to the increase in the private sector consumption. The significant impact of the private sector behavior on the government balance indicate that the Stability and Growth Pact and the Maastricht convergence criteria should need to account for this relationship when determining threshold values. There are several unexplored areas of this paper's topic which still need to be investigated thoroughly. Instead, a future research could investigate the relationship between the government balance and the private sector in a panel regression framework. I think all of material has been presented by properly. Thank you for listening. I hope you will understand about all of the material. And the last word from us is wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.